All right, we're on Chavav Amud Aleph 26a. Yesterday we went through an elaborate version of our Mishnah, the text of the Tosefta, which took us through all the various different types of relationships, what their legal status is, who they are, and all of that. And the legal status of their marriage determined whether she qualifies to be a Sotah, considering that the verse states that she is his wife. So it has to qualify as a legally bona fide wife and not the kind of relationship that the Torah itself looks askance on. We went through the various different versions of that. And the reason why we went through all of this exercise is because of a statement from Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman said that when our Mishnah cited a dispute as to whether or not a woman who can't give birth qualifies as a Sotah, right? One version that said their marriage doesn't produce children and therefore doesn't qualify as a Sotah, considering that it has to be the optimal version of marriage. And the other opinion which said, well, he can marry someone else in theory and produce children that way, so there's no problem. So Rav Nachman said that dispute is only when she became infertile sometime later in life, either by some sort of condition or old age. But an islandess, but a girl who from birth is born infertile, right, which basically means a sexually underdeveloped woman, something like that. So that, said Rav Nachman, everybody agrees that she cannot drink the Sotah water because everybody agrees she cannot drink the Sotah water because the Torah says that if she drinks the water and she's innocent, she will seed offspring. Because this woman from birth is incapable of seeding offspring, she doesn't qualify as a Sotah. In other words, Rav Nachman understands that this statement at the end is not just a blessing, that she'll have children, but it's actually a qualifier. In order to qualify as a Sotah woman, she has to be capable of producing seed. This was Rav Nachman's position. So we went through a whole exercise, a whole lengthy elaboration of our Mishnah to come to the final point, which was that this elongated version of our Mishnah states that a woman who is born infertile is a regular bona fide wife, and she can choose either drink the Sotah water, go through with the proceeding, or relinquish the ketubah, just like every other wife. So this, said the Gemara yesterday, serves as a refutation to Rav Nachman's position, and thus the questioner stakes his ground and says, I disagree with Rav Nachman. And the questioner would say that even a woman born with infertility, nonetheless, fully bona fide wife and can be a Sotah, and thus can choose between drinking the water or relinquishing the ketubah. So now we have to substantiate Rav Nachman's view, considering that Rav Nachman seems to be in direct contradiction to the Mishnaic text that we quoted yesterday.
He says you can't.
He says
a woman who
a woman born infertile doesn't qualify as a Sotah because the verse states that she will seed offspring, and she's incapable of seeding offspring. And that statement, she seeds offspring, which is said at the end that if she drinks the water, she'll seed offspring, and if she drinks the water and she's innocent, she'll seed offspring. That Rav Nachman understood to be a qualifier, not just a blessing.
But he was okay with the women who no longer are able to have children.
That's right. The women who no longer are able to have children, that's where the dispute comes in between Rabbi Lezer and the sages.
Because they can't have children either.
But they could. They were capable once, and therefore they still qualify. This is how Rav Nachman understands the verse. It's a very interesting reading, but that says reading.
Right, but you see but they're basing it on the fact that the one who's born infertile can't have children as the basis why she can't drink. Well, the women who no longer can have children, even though they once could, they presently
Right.
can't.
Yeah.
So the waters would also seem to.
Rav Nachman seems to be saying that it's a statement of like defining who she is,
But it seemed to be based on the
not something
waters.
she became.
The waters would be lying.
Oh, it's not a question of whether the water is effective or not. It's a question of whether the verse is applying the law to you. That's all. Is the verse applying the law to this woman? That's it. So you have to look at the definitions of the verse and see. It's not a question of whether. It's not a question of effectiveness of the water. It's a question of qualifying who qualifies as a Sotah. That's all. There's a law. The law applies to certain types of people. Does it apply to this woman or not? That's the question.
It seemed like the waters say that she'll be blessed with children. It doesn't seem to be differentiated between whether she was able to have children prior or whether she.
Okay, well, so we'll see the underlying logic in a moment, but for now, let's just for now, just to understand this. Rav Nachman is just reading that these words are not just a blessing to her that she'll have children, but it's actually a qualifier as to which type of women does the law apply to.
Right, that makes sense.
That's it. And because it describes a woman who's seeding offspring, so therefore this entire law only applies to a woman who's capable of such, or at least was capable of such. That's how he's interpreting the verse. That's all. We'll go see more underlying layers, but for now, that's what we have. Okay, so now we have to substantiate Rav Nachman's view. Considering that we have a Mishnaic age text that disputed his view. So Omar Lach Rav Nachman might respond. See, so just to give you a little historical context for the Gemara's phrasing, so you understand, we've talked about this before, how the Gemara is a conglomerate of generations of conversations. So you have to know where you're standing in terms of the generations to know why the Gemara is speaking as it does. So we had the Mishnah, which is the Belezer and the sages dispute about whether a woman who's infertile constitutes as a Sotah, and their dispute was based on whether this is a legit marriage. According to one view, because they can't have children, not legit. According to the other view, it's perfectly fine because in theory, he can marry someone else to have children. That was there. Now, if not, in some generations later, who says, oh, that dispute here, that's only talking about someone who became infertile later. But someone who's always infertile, no dispute, because she doesn't qualify as a Sotah for the verse. That's Rav Nachman. And then we, analyzing Rav Nachman's statement, are here. And we're saying, well, considering that we found another text up here which disputes Rav Nachman, we have to assume what Rav Nachman would have said. This is the conversation. So Amar Lach Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman would tell you, says us, sometime after Rav Nachman passed. Perhaps what he would say is Tanoi, this very notion as to whether or not a woman born infertile qualifies as a Sotah or not, or rephrase that. This very notion that the statement at the end of the Sotah law, which describes the blessing, that a woman who's innocent, who drinks the water, will seed offspring. And I argued that that statement is not just a blessing, but a qualifier. So I'm going to tell you, says Rav Nachman, we are saying, Rav Nachman would tell you that that very notion is disputed by the generation above me, by the sages. I'm going to quote another Mishnaic text, which actually substantiates me, which means that even before I came around, me, Rav Nachman, there was a dispute about whether or not this verse is a qualifier. And I'm choosing that opinion. This is what we're doing here. Clear?
In other words, this case about the infertile woman from birth wasn't raised at the time of Rav Nachman.
Rav Nachman just made it as a statement. He just said a statement.
But they didn't bring up that case.
We don't know.
This time.
We don't know.
Oh.
We're analyzing it. We just have a statement by tradition. Rav Nachman said X.
Okay.
Now we have to substantiate with all the other texts we have.
Because Rav Nachman presumably would have seen that higher text as well.
Correct. So therefore we have to think, what was Rav Nachman thinking? So we say, you know what he was thinking? He must have found this other Mishnaic text, and he chooses that one as the ruling text. So let's see. So Tanoi, this very notion as to whether or not this statement at the end of her seeding offspring, whether that's a qualifier or a blessing, that itself is under dispute by the generation above me, by the generation of the Mishnah. Va'anan, Rav Nachman would have said, the Amri, when I made my statement, which said that a woman who's infertile from birth does not qualify as a Sotah. I was following Kihaitana, like the other opinion. What's that other opinion? The Tanya. So we have another Mishnah H text. And this other Mishnah H text substantiates my view. Because it reads as follows. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Aymar, Rabbi Shimon, son of Elazar, says, Ailan is a woman born infertile, so she's sexually underdeveloped. Rabbi Shimon, son of Elazar, says, she doesn't drink the Sotah water, nor does she get a ketubah. So the Mishnah H text we said yesterday said that a woman who is born infertile is a regular woman and therefore can choose either go through the Sotah proceeding and drink the water or relinquish the ketubah. Whereas here we have Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar saying the exact reverse. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is a Mishnaic halachic thinker, a Tana, and thus is on equal footing to the text you raised yesterday. So we see, says the Gemara of Nachman would have said to us, you see, this question as to whether or not a woman born infertile, whether she qualifies as a Sotah or not, is not an issue that I'm raising. It's already disputed in the previous generation in the Mishnah's era. And I am just siding with one opinion. The opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar indeed quotes the very same text, the very same verse, and interprets it the same way I did, says Rav Nachman. Or Rav Nachman would say. Shenemar, as the verse reads, the niksa v'nizra zera. If she drinks the Sotah waters and she is innocent, she will seed offspring. This indicates not just a blessing, but a qualifier as to who can be a Sotah. Mi shadar kalazuya, a woman who is capable of seeding, she's fully sexually developed, even if later in life she became infertile, but she's capable of seeding, she's the kind of woman that can be a Sotah. This is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's view, who Rav Nachman is supporting some generations later. So Yatzazu, this excludes the kind of woman, she'ein dar kalazriya, who is incapable of seeding. Okay, so now,
I'm sorry.
Sorry?
Is he citing a source also higher than the?
Yes, that's why I made the generation things, right?
Right.
So we have Rav Nachman in the middle, we have us analyzing Rav Nachman, we're down here, and we have the Mishnah up here. So yesterday we quoted one Mishnah text that disputed Rav Nachman.
Right.
And today we're quoting another Mishnah text that supports Rav Nachman.
Okay, good.
So that way the dispute is a generation before, and that's the way we can substantiate Rav Nachman's view.
So we're at a deadlock again with the.
We're at clarity. The dispute predates Rav Nachman, and thus there's two different views. That's all.
Yeah.
So a deadlock in terms of we don't know what to do, but at least now we can. At least now we have. That's right. Yeah. But now this Mishnah text actually goes further and tells us as to what's the counter argument to this reading of the verse, right? This reading, which you were questioning, but this is the reading, which is that when the verse says at the end that if she drinks and she's innocent, she will seed offspring.
Yeah.
Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and then Rav Nachman some generations later both understand that verse to be not just a blessing, but actually a qualifier as to who can be a Sotah, the kind of woman who's capable of seeding, and a woman who's born infertile is incapable of seeding and therefore doesn't qualify as a Sotah. This Mishnah text that we're quoting today gives us the counter reading as follows. The Rabbanan and the sages, those who disagree with Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and they're of the view, as we read yesterday, that a woman born infertile is a regular bona fide wife, and therefore she can qualify as a Sotah, and thus has the choice: drink the water or lose the ketubah. So, Hai v'niksa v'nizra zera. This verse which says that if she's innocent, she will seed offspring. My avidle, how do they understand it? Actually, this is not the Mishnah text. This is the Gemara now analyzing it. So, but Maboyalahu, they, the sages, would use that verse for the following, simply for the blessing. Look at the Tanya, as another Mishnah H text states, the Niksa v'nizra zera, another Mishnah H text. We have a third Mishnah H text. We had one from yesterday that said that a woman born infertile does qualify as a Sotah. We had today's Mishnah Gauge text, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, which says a woman born infertile does not qualify as a Sotah because the verse says she has to be capable of seeding. And now we have a third Mishnah Gauge text, which gives us another reading to this verse that says she is innocent and she will seed offspring. And this reading is the reading we always understood it to mean. That is, it's a blessing. Namely, that if this woman, this innocent woman who drinks the Sotah water, was infertile, she was an akara, nifkedes, she is then blessed with children. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, this is the words of Rabbi Akiva. So this is Rabbi Akiva's reading. Rabbi Akiva is of the view, a woman infertile certainly qualifies as a Sotah in conjunction with yesterday's reading. And he takes this statement at the end, which says that if she's innocent, she will seed offspring, to mean that even a woman who is born infertile, if she becomes a Sotah and is proven to be innocent, she is blessed with children.
It's no longer a qualifier.
It's not a qualifier, it's only a blessing. Amar like Rabbi Yishmael, but Rabbi Yishmael sides with Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and says, no, this statement cannot, well, actually, we don't know if he sides with Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, but he certainly doesn't agree with Rabbi Akiva that this is an unqualified blessing. Any woman innocent after being a Sotah, blessed with children. Why is this? Why does Rabbi Shmuel not like that? Because if so, yistru kol hakaros, every single infertile woman will go and behave promiscuously. She'll go seclude herself with some guy, raise the jealousy of her husband, make her husband warn her, go seclude herself, and then control herself while she's in that private room, go to this temple, or make God's name be erased, drink the Sotah water and have children. We're encouraging, we are encouraging misbehavior in marriages. We're encouraging jealousy. We're encouraging suspicion, even though, let's just say, we trust them all not to misbehave behind closed doors. But what are we doing to marriages here?
Well, she could be in conspiracy with her husband.
I don't know if it'll work then, right?
Then it shouldn't work for her either.
Well,
Because her intent wasn't really for ill motive.
That's a good question. It's a good point. But let's say she does it on her own without her husband. Her husband's indeed jealous. He indeed warns her. She indeed secluded herself. Everything qualifies. Well, even if she isn't in conspiracy with her husband, that's still irresponsible, so to speak.
Well,
It
has a good end.
Yeah. Okay, look, again, I'm with you. I said this yesterday. That if I don't get a vote, but if I got a vote, I would say, good. So let's make halachic ways for everybody to get blessed with children. Like, good. I'm all for it. But let's just understand Rabbi Shmuel's view.
Oh, yeah.
Rabbi Shmuel's view is like, what do we, like, there's a big discussion in modern politics when you talk about like government programs. So you have a good government program that provides lots of great things, but what are you incentivizing people to do to qualify for those programs? Right? Like unemployment benefits. So are we incentivizing unemployment? Right? This is a question of balancing incentivizing unemployment versus providing for those who need. So this is a similar kind of discussion. We want to help women have children, but what are we going to start incentivizing jealousies amongst husband and wife? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, no.
Right? So Rabbi Shmuel is of the view that you're incentivizing problematic relationships and marriages because you're telling them, oh, you don't have children, no problem, go hang out with another guy. What are we doing? This is not healthy. And furthermore, says Rabbi Shmuel, this other woman, because she wants to behave modestly and does not seclude herself with some other guy, if she loses out. Not only are we incentivizing misbehavior, the woman who chooses not to misbehave loses out. It's exactly like the question of unemployment benefits. I went to work, so if I lose out, I get paid less. Because if I went on unemployment, I'd get more from the government. Now then I went to work, I get less. That's not fair. So the same thing is true with this case here. Which was arguing, here's a woman who's trying to behave properly. And because she behaved properly, no children. Neighbor misbehaves, she gets children. It's not fair.
Yeah.
Right? So therefore, Rabbi Shmuel says, we can't say that this is a blanket blessing for everybody. It's just, and in life, things are unfair. Whereas Rabbi Akiva would argue and say, okay, fine, so let them be a little unfair, but at least they're having children. That would be Rabbi Akiva's response, maybe. That's what I'm saying. This is a good. You can see the tension in the discussion, right? Which is like a healthy kind of tension.
Yeah.
balancing these values. Okay, so back to Rishmal's view, which says that it cannot be a blanket blessing, because otherwise we're encouraging promiscuity, and someone who wants to behave modestly loses out in the blessing. So in case if so, if so, how does Rabbi Shmuel understand the verse, which says that if she's innocent, she will seed offspring? If Rabbi Shmuel doesn't say it's a blanket blessing for children, so what's the meaning of this verse? So says the Rabbi Shmuel, if prior to her drinking the Sotah waters, she used to give birth in pain, it was very painful, it was a difficult pregnancy and labor, and Yeledes berevach, she'll have children literally broadly, in peace, easily. Nekevos, if she was giving birth only to girls, she really wanted a boy, Yeledes secharim, she'll have male offspring. Tsarim, she gave birth to very small children. Yeledes aruchim, she'll give birth to longer children, to bigger, taller children. Shoidim, she was giving birth to black children. I suppose this means like some sort of illness of problematic pigmentation. Yeledes levenim, she'll give birth to white, healthy children. Not white as in the race, right. But white as in like this healthy complexion. Okay, this is the end. So Rishmal says, blanket statement for everybody to have children. No, that would incentivize promiscuity. And the woman who's behaving and doesn't behave promiscuously loses out the blessing. But the blessing is there for someone who has difficulty giving birth, that she'll get blessed to have easy birth. Unhealthy children, she's blessed with healthy children. Okay, so end of the discussion. Now, let me ask you, if Rabbi Shmuel is concerned with incentivizing this behavior, so are we incentivizing every woman who has a hard labor to go behave promiscuously? And what about the neighbor who's not behaving promiscuously? She suffers because she now has suffers because she was misbehaving and she has difficult birth. Like the same argument, is it not? Is it not? Right? So, which means, I don't know, I'm just putting this out there, this is my own thinking.
Rabbi,
go ahead. Yeah, sorry, Judge.
No. I want to make sure you finish your thought, please.
No, I'm just saying that Tosis actually asked the question and leaves it unanswered.
Right.
Yesterday, yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So I was just going to say that we can see that Rabbi Shmuel, even though he's on one side of the fence, he still feels the tension on the other end.
In other words, he's giving the argument that he was against.
Exactly. So because he says, like, look, we can't incentivize misbehavior, but at the same time, we also have to provide blessings too. So, like, I'm not answering the question. I'm just making the point that even when you're on one side of the fence, you still feel the tension. You still feel the argument to the other side of the fence. Otherwise, you're not living like an honest, balanced.
Rabbi, I feel that your non-answer is really an answer. It's wonderfully done, because that's what happens, for example, when three judges sit together and they're trying to figure out what to do. And if I could if you have a moment, I'd like to just introduce something that I think that it's wonderful to hear you and Yehoshua in discussing this, because what we're seeing here is this is like a debate that you hear between originalist positions, from the point of view of strict law, which is an originalist position, and that was just called the growing tree. That when times changed, should we not apply the originalist position? And as a result, we really should apply the originalist position. However, even with the growing tree, we should know how to do it. So, for example, now this is a very an issue that's very real, because with the fertility clinics, for example, women who could not have children suddenly are having children, and sometimes people don't know it. That's number one. So this becomes a very interesting. If the halacha that is deduced from this, and it's basically is quite remarkable. So fertility clinics on the one hand, and on the second hand, women are having children much later because of the fact that they can stop menstruation.
That's right.
For many years, women are having, even in the 50s and early 60s. We've seen lately.
Yeah.
Now, and it's wonderful, because indirectly, subconsciously, what you're both doing in a beautiful way is you're applying the 13 rules of interpretation.
That's what we're trying to do. Yeah, that's the hope.
Exactly. So the 13 rules of interpretation, every time that I'm hearing you both, I sort of fell with nachas here, because the fact that it's exactly what it goes on in the debates of the greatest academies, of law, and which really comes back. If we would go back to yeshiva times and go and to what we see today in yeshivas on the highest levels, this is exactly, law would be on a much more, I would say, clear and precise level if discussions like this would it would be constant, as we're hearing here in a beautiful way. So there's growth
To the expectation. Yeah.
So as a result, I think that it becomes so relevant, because what happens is that there's nothing in the Talmud that isn't relevant, as we recognize, to making sure that the originalist position is not lost in the growing tree. The growing tree can still be there, of course, but ensuring that we go back to the originalist positions as such. And the debates that we're seeing here is exactly that, which is quite remarkable. Thank you, Rabbi. I'm sorry.
I'm putting up to the expectation. So just bring you back to the point. I just suggesting that perhaps the tension in and of itself is necessary, right?
Yes, because otherwise there would not be a possibility of being able to resolve these matters with the type of
position, and you can't state your position and not consider the value of the other. And
exactly.
Your position is not really that valuable to begin with. So I can't tell you how Rabbi Shmuel draws the line between not blessing the girl who never had children versus blessing the person who's giving birth with difficulty, and now yes, but I can see clearly that he's harboring both sides of the fence even as he comes to his conclusion.
There's a wrestling that has to go on.
But there's definitely the both sides are incorporated what he's saying. Okay, so a few more lines of the Gemara before we conclude. So the Mishnah said, Eishes mamzer lemamzer, a woman, or the Mishnah H text we quoted yesterday, actually, not the Mishnah, said that a woman who is halachically allowed to marry a mamzer. Mamzer is a person born of an illegitimate relationship. And unfortunately, considering is born of an illegitimate relationship, he's limited as to who he's allowed to marry. But he marries someone that he's allowed to. So said the Mishnah that she is a full bona fide wife and therefore qualifies as a site. And therefore the Gemara asks, Pshita, is it not obvious? What's the novelty? If the Mishnah is telling us to, record this law, or in this case, not the Mishnah, the Tosefta, telling us to record this law, then that means the Mishnah, the text wants us to remember this, because if we don't remember it, we might think otherwise. Right? Remember, we're students of the old age without books, so we're trying to commit all this information to memory. So if we're told, remember this, that a woman who is allowed to marry a mamzer, marries a mamzer, she qualifies as a saita. So the Gemara asks, why would I have to commit that to memory? Is it not obvious? Is it not obvious that they're allowed to get married? Why shouldn't they be? Now, our whole discussion earlier was the Torah says in order for her to qualify as a saita, they must be married, and it must be a legitimate marriage. And that was the question when we went through all the various different types of relationships. Is it a legitimate marriage, or is it not a legitimate marriage? Is it temporarily legitimate? Is it correctable? Is it not correctable? But here they seem to be allowed to be married, right? This is the point. The only person he's allowed to marry is this kind of girl. So why shouldn't she qualify as a saita? And here the Gemara says something remarkable. I would have thought, had the Mishnah not told me that these two people are born of a legitimate relationship, but they're allowed to marry each other, had I not been told that she can qualify as a saita, I would think like this: Apushi Sulim Loi Lipush. Because children that they have are themselves qualified as mamzer, so we are promulgating a lineage that's questionable. So perhaps I would have thought, let them not be a saita. Because once she drinks the saita water and she survives, they can go back to living together. In fact, she gets blessed. Either she gets blessed with children she never had, in Rabbi Kiva's view, or she gets blessed with easier birth, right? But certainly there's blessing of offspring coming after the saita waters. And therefore, I might have made the mistake of thinking that because their relationship is illegitimate, because they are born of illegitimate relationships, which is why they're allowed to marry each other, their children are also going to be considered of an illegitimate lineage. And perhaps I would argue, let's end the illegitimate lineage here. And therefore, Kamash Malan comes in the Mishnah and says, no. Even though the offspring they will have will continue the lineage of mamzerus.
They are mamzers,
The children are mamzers. So, nonetheless, still go through with the Sotah. Let her get the blessings, even though her lineage might be mamzerus or will be mamzerus. End of the Gemara. Now, this teaches us another huge lesson
this is more in line with Rabbi Akiva's view then.
Well, it doesn't matter. Even if, let's say, they had one child, who said we want them to have 3 children or 5 children, 10 children, right? Even for Bishmal's view, it would still be a question.
It leaves open the argument about propagating things you don't want to propagate.
Right. So even if it's a Bishmal, it would still work because.
No. Well, yeah.
Right. It works for both. The point is, we have an opportunity here to end promulgating this lineage of mamzerus. Should we?
But the Mishnah is saying.
And the Mishnah is saying, no, don't stop it.
Go ahead with the
Correct. Go ahead with the blessings, whatever the blessings are, either a previous version or a Shmuel's version,
right.
But we're continuing this relationship and let the lineage continue, which is another
Is that the 5th?
lesson in sensitivity. Even though Torah says, sorry?
Is that number 4th of the Mishnah list of higher level of sources?
Oh no, this is the Gemara analyzing yesterday's text,
Okay.
yesterday's Mishnah text. But this gives us another lesson in sensitivity. Even though Torah says that their children, you can't marry them. You can't marry them. They're mamzeres. Those children are mamzers. And an ordinary Jew, born of a regular lineage, can't marry them. And yet Torah says just because they have a difficulty marrying into the community, and just because we have a standard, so to speak, that says we can't marry them, doesn't mean that you get to interject and decide to end lineages. Like, you don't get that call, right? Which is a very interesting kind of phenomenon. Like, you know, I'm taking a little bit more extreme, but the point is still to be made, which is there is a notion out there of like, you know, certain people shouldn't get pregnant because they have high risk of having children with Down syndrome, or God forbid, or whatever the issues might be, you know, or like they're carriers of certain sicknesses or this or that. You don't get to make that call. You don't get to make that call. It's God's business. Here are 2 people, no fault of their own, want to get married. Just because there are laws and realities that make it difficult for them to live, therefore you get to decide and say, okay, fine. So because it's going to be difficult for you to live, no, you don't have to have children. Or you shouldn't have children. We don't do that. We don't do that. That's God's business. Let them have children. Let them live fulfilled lives. Let Hashem bless them. And Hashem will deal with the fact that they happen to have an issue getting married. They'll deal with it. They'll figure it out. But we don't get to play God and decide, okay, you guys can have children because you're good lineage. You guys, not good lineage, don't have children. We don't play that game, which is a very interesting thing. Even though Allah says, look, we can't marry them because of their lineage. Nonetheless, we don't get to play God and determine who does and doesn't have children. So it's a very wonderful balance again, balancing sensitivities.
Discrimination law.
Exactly. Okay, Yidden, have a wonderful day.
Good day. Good day, Judge.
More of this tomorrow.
God bless you. God bless you, Yeshua. Rabbi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's such a joy to be able to participate.